Welcome back to another episode of Beyond Rockets. In this episode, I sit down and talk with the owner behind L'Etoile, a French bakery and cafe that recently opened its Storefront on Meridian Street in downtown Huntsville. First off, thank you for taking the time to sit down and talking with me. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
No, thanks for having me. My name is Kevin Zurmuehlen. I'm the pastry chef and co-owner of L'Etoile Patisserie, French bakery and cafe here in Huntsville, 1214 Meridian Street.
Are you originally from Huntsville, or did work or family bring you here?
Work did. I was a member of the Army, active duty Army for 20 years, retired in 2010, and then we came here in 2002 actually to Redstone Arsenal, stayed here for the last 8 years of our active duty. Once I retired, I went into federal service as a civilian and did that for 10 years before opening this bakery.
So, as looking on your website, a lot of your time in the Army is a big part of your life. I mean, you spent 34 years in the Army and doing various different roles. What was the last role you had prior to this, and how was that transition between the two?
Sure. So I was the director of the Army Acquisition Center of Excellence here in Huntsville, and that was a schoolhouse for the Army that trained all of the officers and non-commissioned officers who had been selected to do the business side of the Army, the weapon system development, contracting, test and evaluation. We were the schoolhouse that provided them all their training. The transition coming into this was actually kind of seamless because at the time we were going through the COVID pandemic. And so when we made the determination that we were going to go ahead and open this bakery and that I needed to resign from my position and retire and do this full time, we were already in a COVID environment working from home anyway, so it was kind of...
It's and there's sweet treats around the house now too,
Exactly.
So it's kind of like a win-win almost.
It wasn't a bad problem to have it all. Not a bad problem at all.
And it's kind of very interesting to think about because, I guess people on the outside would look in and see what you were doing in your 9 to 5 or your typical job before you were doing this, and it's a completely different ballgame. I mean, you were working for somebody, now you're working for yourself.
Right.
You were kind of scheduled to come in at a certain time and do certain things each day, and now it's kind of like it's up to you to almost kind of do what you think you need to do, or what maybe needs to get checked off that day. And things always change when you're a small business owner.
That's right. It's working for a big organization like the Department of the Army. It was easy for me to do my job on a daily basis very well. But I always had the excuse if someone else in Washington, D.C. didn't do their job, so I couldn't do my job,
Yeah.
right? Now, as a small business owner, if it doesn't happen, it's because I didn't do it.
Yeah.
So the responsibility does fall on us. My wife and I are both running this, co-owning together. And if we don't do it, it doesn't happen.
So obviously, your skills that you had in your day-to-day job, working for the Army for the last 30 plus years, not really the same skills you do on being a pastry chef and doing that. How did you acquire those skills to do what you do today?
So believe it or not, about 10 years ago, my wife and I started watching a show on Netflix called The Great British Bake Off. And it's a competition where amateur bakers in Great Britain get together for a series of challenges over a number of weeks and do these really intricate bakes. And while we were watching, I like to do new things. I like to try new stuff. I'd never baked before, really not spent much time in the kitchen, but I thought that's something I could enjoy. Baking is a science, and I really like that technical aspect of baking. So I thought I'd like to try that. So I started working around the house, started doing my own projects around the house, started doing more projects that were more involved. What I was seeing on Great British Bake Off is what I wanted to try, so I started doing that. Posted some things to Instagram, eventually ended up getting accepted to the Auguste Escoffier School of Culinary Arts in Boulder, Colorado to be certified as a pastry chef. Completed that curriculum, and then started looking around here where I could possibly do that as something after the Army, just as a hobby, if nothing else. My wife looked at me one night, we both go to church, we both believe in God, believe that God has a plan for our lives. And she looked at me one night and said, "Is God trying to do something with this baking thing?" And my answer was, of course he's not. I'm halfway through my second career with the Army. Why would I stop that now? But if God is trying to do something with this baking, what would our next steps be? What is it that we should do next if we think that's the direction he wants us to go? So we started exploring. What would it look like for us to open up our own bakery in Huntsville? And what kind of financing would we need? What kind of regulations would we have to endure? What health department codes would we have to fall underneath? We started looking at all that.
Which is, the information out there, I think nowadays people are starting their own business, starting all different sorts of businesses, especially during the COVID time. I mean, they realized they had a passion for something they didn't really know they had before. They tried new things, but I feel like still the information out there, I mean, it's a lot of information to go through.
There is. There's a ton of information. And you know what? I'm not the first person that's tried to open a bakery in America or Huntsville, Alabama for that matter. So there's tons of people out there that already have that requisite lessons learned. And I tapped into them. I called people that would be considered my competitors here in town and said, what were your lessons learned? And you know what? The small business community in Huntsville is phenomenal. They didn't say, we're not going to help you because you're our competitor. They said, this is what we learned, and this is how you can do better.
Which, I mean, it's
phenomenal.
It's a crazy thing because, like, most people think competition's a bad thing. Competition almost it either drives somebody out or, like, it just doesn't really work. But, I mean, like you said, the Huntsville small business community is so welcoming and so willing to help. And
absolutely.
I think there's one part of Googling how to do a business, but there's another part of asking someone who's actually done it how to do it.
Right.
And those lessons and you're able to navigate it a lot quicker that way. I mean, when you Google something, I mean, you're going to have thousands and thousands of results to try to that doesn't really pertain to me, and that doesn't, and that doesn't. Okay, well, what if this person that opened up 3 blocks away or 2 miles away, how did they do it? And that's a crazy thing. Do you think that if COVID didn't happen, that you would have had the opportunities to do this? Or do you think that because that opportunity and that timing when you were already at home and already kind of, I mean, you were able to work from home, like you said, you were able to kind of do other things while you were also at home and working?
Yeah, definitely. COVID doesn't make any sense to me that it helped us, but it did. Once we made the determination that I was going to resign from my position with the Army and do this full time, we decided to start baking out of the home. You know, a little practice for me. I thought we'd make a little bit of money, you know, have a couple of orders from family, friends, former co-workers, whatnot. So we put up a website. We started putting up a limited menu. About that time, AL.com did an article on us.
Wow.
And that article blew us up basically overnight. And from that point forward, we were from June of last year until just here recently, we were about 6 weeks advance booked through the entire COVID for people to come pick up pastries from some random guy's house in South Huntsville. You know, it made no sense to me, but for some reason, because of COVID, people were more willing to do that. Yeah. So that enabled us. So it was kind of a right time, right place scenario. And if you go back to I really believe God called us into this. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe that God had his hand on this and used COVID during a pandemic for us to still be able to be successful as a new start business.
I mean, that's like a crazy thing to think about. I mean, just being able to start something in such when the economy is not really wanting it, like it's not really helping new businesses start at this time. It's a tough place to be in. And even if the economy was fantastic, it's really even hard all the time for a small business to kind of even start and have success and find success. And was it that moment when you were just creating the pastries for 1 or 2 people or 3 or 4, you know, you might have 5 orders a week, to the moment where you had dozens and dozens of orders a week? Was that just like a flip of the switch with that article, or did it take a little bit of kind of just getting the word out?
No, it was pretty much a flip of the switch with that article. We had to shut down our website for a couple of days, actually, to revamp our ordering system to make sure that we didn't kill ourselves.
Yeah.
Because baking out of the house with 2 ovens, one as a proofer, one as a baker, I had to limit the amount of orders we took in on a daily basis, and we were still working 16, 18, 19 hours a day to fulfill that demand.
So when you started kind of baking and you started seeing that success in your house, just with people coming in and ordering on your website and people following you on Instagram and stuff, how quickly did the opportunity kind of come up to get this location you have now? And was that something, I mean, like you talked about earlier, just you always wanted to open up the actual storefront. Right. But how quickly did that storefront option actually come available? And were you looking at other locations too?
So before we decided to make the switch and resign from my position with the Army and do this full time, we had already scouted out this location and come to the conclusion that this is where we were going to be located. Talked with the owners of the building, who also own Preservation Company right next door. And it turns out that they go to church as well and believe in God. And I came to him and said, I believe that this location would be a perfect spot for a French bakery and cafe. And he kind of just looked at me and literally out of his briefcase, which was sitting next to his desk, He pulled out plans for a bakery in this spot. They'd been praying for about 3 years to have a bakery.
Oh, wow.
We're just waiting for the right opportunity. And his plans matched with mine by about 95%. What I had drawn on the back of a napkin matched with what he'd done architecturally.
You're like, that looks exactly like what I kind of like.
So this was the location. I wasn't going to go anyplace else.
Wow, like you said. I mean, just knowing that God's going to put you through the right things when not only you don't think you're ready, but also He's ready for you to be there. And just
That's right.
all these things get lined up. So, almost like it almost could be a coincidence if you didn't believe what you do believe.
Correct. Yeah,
And-
but there's too many moving pieces here, too many moving variables that I can only give glory to God for this.
Mhm.
I mean, it was Him that orchestrated this. We had originally planned on opening in October of 20.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to do construction and renovation during the middle of a pandemic and all the supply chain being all messed up and subcontractors not being available because apparently there's this huge construction boom happening in North Alabama right now.
It's kind of crazy. Like I can almost see that when you drive around.
It is. You can.
It's
You can
insane.
see it. It's all across the region. We're a relatively small project,
Mhm.
so getting subs in to do some of the electrical, plumbing, etc., was difficult at first. So obviously we didn't open on time.
Yeah.
And I had to keep going back to the fact that this is not my timing, but it's God's timing. And He's going to allow us to be in here when it's the perfect time to do so. And so now we're here. We've built up a pretty successful amount of clientele before we even had a storefront.
Yeah.
And that says something.
For sure.
And it's not because we did anything or tried to make it that way. I truly believe it's because God orchestrated it that way for us.
So, kind of the transition between you baking at your house and baking here. I mean, there's definitely some limitations and a big learning curve. I mean, from
Sure.
baking in a small home oven to a commercial-sized sort of kitchen. What are some of the limitations and some of the things you had to kind of figure out along the way that you would have really just thought it would have been easier? Like, oh, it's more space; it would have just been easier.
So my initial assumption was that, in fact, going from a home kitchen to a commercial kitchen would be easier. And in fact, in some ways it is. We have a lot more capability for throughput. I can put out a lot more product here than I could at the house. For example, every 30 minutes at the house, I could put out 12 croissants, a dozen croissants. In the shop, I can put out 12 dozen in 15 minutes if I needed to, right, because of the oven space that we
Yeah.
have. The limitation is the scope of that 12 dozen. We have a small kitchen. It's a small facility. My time to scale to put out each of those croissants was underestimated by me. I thought I'd be able to do it quicker than I was. So we opened last week. We've had lines out the door every single morning for 5-6 hours at a time. And part of that line is because we're struggling to keep up with the demand. We're struggling to keep croissants coming out, as an example, out of the kitchen in time for people that want them out here. We're learning. We're getting there. I've hired a couple more people. We're learning some processes that will allow us to take care of that ahead of time. So there are definitely some learning curves, but man, we've made some improvements over the past 5-6 days.
Yeah, and
being open.
I think that's really a testament just to your ability to adapt. I mean, like you said, like having a space, you think everything's going to come easier. Like people are going to be able to sit down and enjoy it, and like the vision's there, and you're able to see that on a day-to-day basis. I mean, people come in and they enjoy it,
Sure.
and you're able to kind of almost interact with the customer in a different way than what you were doing when they were coming to your front door. But it's still like every day you're learning something new, and I think continuing to see that trajectory of continuing to learn, continuing to adapt. I mean, you're not going to know everything when you start.
And I think that's an important point for
yeah.
anybody that's trying to start a business. You're probably going to have an 80% solution
Yeah.
and a 20% delta that you're going to have to figure out on the fly.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay.
And it's kind of somewhat of the fun in it too.
It is.
I
It's
think.
a challenge. Yeah, absolutely.
If you knew everything going in, then often you wouldn't really want to do it. I don't think. I think if you half the battle of trying anything new or starting anything new is the process and the learning curve that you experience.
Absolutely.
And the learning curves will change throughout the process of your journey. I mean, from when you started, you had a learning curve, and then you started figuring things out. And then you open this, and you had a learning curve, and you're trying to figure things out. And eventually new things will happen, and new opportunities will come up, and you're going to still continue to learn and figure things out.
It's never boring.
No, definitely not.
There's always something new. And I'll be honest with you, too. I'll come out here every once in a while when I have the opportunity and chat with our customers and tell them, hey, look, I'm sorry, we're trying to get these things out as fast as possible. Our customers have been so incredibly supportive, every single one of them. It's blown me away. Where I would expect somebody to be kind of upset that they had to wait 5 minutes to get a croissant when they could have just walked up.
They're just happy they're here. And
They're happy they're here,
Yeah.
and they're happy to see that we've been successful with getting clientele. So it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
People really do like to support the small business.
So I think often not just even like the hurdles you face as being a small business owner, either that be in location and just time management. Could you tell a little bit about some of your like what your schedule would look like on a day-to-day basis? Because I think when people come in, they just see the croissants and they see that you're working here then, but they don't get to see the hours you're here beforehand. Can you give me a little bit of what a day in the life of being a pastry chef looks like here?
Sure. All right. So with the French viennoiserie is what it's called. It's not a 30-minute product. You don't mix it together, get a batter, stick it in a mold, put it in the oven for 15 minutes, and voila, you have a product. A croissant takes 2 days from start to finish. It's a process that takes time. And that ends in a 15-minute bake. That 2 days ends in this little 15-minute bake, but then at the end of that, you get this nice product.
Mm-hmm.
So keep that in mind as I'm telling you what our schedule is. So a day in the life. I get here in between 2:30 and 3 o'clock most days. And that's for a 7 o'clock opening. And to have about 14 to 15 dozen worth of product to be on the display case at 7 o'clock in the morning. So that gets me here. I get the dough out that's going to be baked for that morning and let it proof, let it rise. Do the actual baking and then put it into the display case. The rest of the morning is production, just trying to keep that display case filled with the different products that we have for that day. Starting at about 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in that afternoon, I'll start dough prep for the following day's activities. And that usually finishes up around 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. Go home, get some dinner, sit on the couch with my wife, discuss the day, do a little after-action review, go to bed, get up the next morning, do the same thing all over again. So we're learning lessons during this whole process, and that time period is starting to shorten a little bit. The more we learn, the better we're doing.
And I think it'd be interesting to see how, so with your job you had prior and you had a 9 to 5, very typical, you understood how to time management between work and family and everything like that. You were able to really figure out, okay, this is when I was to go to work, this is when I have the time to go home. How tough has it been over this last year and a half or so for that time management, and how do you find that balance?
So one of the biggest reasons we were so excited to get into the brick and mortar location was that our house could be our house and not a commercial bakery.
Yes.
It would, pretty much for the last year, it was a commercial bakery. So now we have a home and we have this work.
Yeah.
But anybody who's opened a business, or you've studied a lot of people who have and talked with a lot of people who have, it's kind of like having a new baby, right? You're going to spend an inordinate amount of time with that new baby up front, learning, getting the processes down, understanding what the needs and requirements are, and eventually you'll settle down into a normal routine. We're definitely in the newborn stage right here, and we're still learning some lessons and spending quite a bit of time here. But we are making plans for the future, that we do want to be able to ensure that we're not going to make this our life.
Yeah.
That we're not going to spend 24/7 at the shop. That I still have a responsibility to my wife to be a good husband, not just a good provider, but a good husband.
Yeah.
And so we are definitely taking active steps to kind of replicate ourselves here, so that we don't have to be here 24/7 in order to be successful. That's why we're hiring new people. That's why we're training them. That's why we're coaching and mentoring them as we go through this learning process together. So one, they're better improved and they have more on their resume as employees for the future, but also so we can enjoy the benefits of being owners of a business and watching something grow without us having to be there 24/7 to make it happen.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think that like having to understand too is, like, if someone's listening and wants to start their own business, that you don't start the business to begin with because you want to sell it and get rid of it and give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
If that's the passion you have when you want to start the business, you probably shouldn't start the business at all. It's going to be tough days. It's going to be long hours. It's going to be 24/7 all the time, and it's almost you're going to eat, breathe, and sleep that business.
That's right.
But like you said, putting those people in places that are good, that you believe are well fit and well trained to run it, and you're able to say go on vacation and go like stay home just for do a staycation. I mean, just not actually leave your house at all.
Right.
Instead of having to bake 2 at your house and do everything like that. So like being able to put those people in place, I mean, it just shows the growth of the business, and there's always stuff to learn and always things to adapt and stuff like that. did you always think you had an entrepreneurial mindset? Did you always like envision one day you would own an own business? You just never knew what it would be?
Yes, I've always wanted to do something along these lines. Being with the Army, it was a little difficult. I was deployed quite a bit on active duty. As a civilian, I traveled quite a bit, so I wasn't really in a position to do anything entrepreneurial. It really took God having to convince us that this was the direction that He wanted us to go. For me to finally make that step and make it happen, because to be quite honest, it was easy to be with the Army. I just had to show up and do my job every day, right? It was comfortable, it was safe, it was something I've known for the past 30 years. Making a decision to leave that behind and jump into a brand new career at my age, I'm 53 years old. You probably shouldn't be starting a new career at 53. But again, that's what you look at how God deals with people in the Bible, and God has dealt with crazy. His way of doing things is crazy according to the world. And so that's what makes this story for me something that was compelling, that I knew God was trying to do something with us, because it's nuts. It's crazy.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be doing this. But that's how He works. That's what He deals with. So to me, it's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, did you have people when you first kind of had this idea and you were ready to start this? Did you have people that doubted that? You're really close to retiring. You shouldn't do this. Like, this is just a good hobby you could have for your friends and family, not necessarily for the public.
My boss in Washington, D.C. said pretty much those words.
Yeah.
Hey, come on, man. You can ride this out for the next 10 years and you're good to go. But I explained to him that it really wasn't my call.
No.
I really felt I had to move out in obedience to what God was calling us to do, and we're going to do it. And God's blessed it.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to think about when that moment with that conversation with your boss, and then leading up to these conversations you've had with Preservation Company and the location, and then all these things along the way, have kind of almost solidified that for that decision and that initial taking the step, taking that risk.
Absolutely.
Which is always the hardest. That first step is always the hardest. It doesn't get easier, but that one's really hard to begin with.
That was the hardest one.
Yes.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that I say something along the lines of what our mission statement is for L'Etoile Patisserie. A lot of the world would, my Master of Business Administration that I've got would tell me that I have to put my primary objective up first.
Mm-hmm.
What's an objective of business? Well, you want to make money. Our mission statement's a little bit backwards. L'Etoile Patisserie exists to glorify God by strengthening our community through relationship, by providing excellent customer service and artisan quality baked goods. God, community, service, baked goods.
Yeah.
Baked goods is fourth.
Yeah. This space is much more than just a bakery.
This is much more to us than a bakery. I believe it's God's calling for us to be here and to show the community that we're serving that God has a plan for their life, loves them, and wants them to be a part of His plan for their life. And oh, by the way, here's your croissant. And it's been really edifying. It's been very fulfilling. It's been very encouraging for the past week or so to see the amount of people that have already come through the door have asked me the question, how'd you get started baking? This makes no sense. And I'm like, you're right. It doesn't make sense. This is what God has called us to do.
Yeah.
I get to tell that story, and I get to see that light go on in people's eyes.
Yeah.
So that's more fulfilling than any kind of...
that makes the early morning and the late afternoons a little bit easier.
And that's something for anybody that wants to start a business, and you've already alluded to it a little bit. Don't start a business because you're trying to make money.
No.
I mean, obviously you want to make some money.
Yeah.
You got to make profit, or why do it?
Yeah.
But don't do that for that reason. Don't try to, you're just going to make money, because your passion's not going to be there.
Yeah.
Do something that you're going to be passionate for. Your customers are going to see that passion, and the business is going to take care of itself as a result. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's a crazy thing, because it's like the good days are really good and the bad days are really bad.
That's a good way to put it.
Having that passion makes those bad days, even if they're really bad, okay, like I have an overall reaching goal of what this business is supposed to be for. Like, it's not just a business to make money. So if I have a really bad day or really bad customer review or whatever that might be, it's okay.
Yeah.
And it's not the end all be all. It's just another day, and wake up every morning thinking that the next day is going to be better and then better. And then
expectation management.
Yeah, and if you look at it if you look at every morning as being that, hey, like, I'm going to make this day the best day I can. Like, I will do the best I can today. then people and things line up in places, and you're able to really get things. I mean,
Customers see that.
Yeah. And
Suppliers see that. Vendors see that. Coworkers see that. The businesses around you see that.
yeah.
And you'll end up strengthening your community through relationship if you approach it that way. At least that's what we're trying to accomplish.
So looking at the growth that this pastry cafe has had, from starting it in your kitchen at home to just kind of getting the skills to classes to eventually now opening, where do you see it continuing to move in the future, and what are some of the goals you have moving forward?
So obviously, keeping in mind our overall goal is to strengthen our community through relationship. I don't want to lose touch with people that are coming through this door. One of the best things about working out of our house for the past year was that our customers came to our front door. We had the opportunity to talk with them, 5-10 minutes. I've had customers come back, take a cup of coffee, and sit at my kitchen table, watch and talk to me while I was working in the kitchen. We wouldn't have had that opportunity in a retail environment right off the bat. All right, so we're trying to accomplish that in this brick and mortar location. So whatever I talk about after this, that's our primary goal, is to still resonate on a relationship level with each of our customers. From a business standpoint, there's a wholesale market out there in the bakery world that I think Huntsville is kind of limited in right now. And so we've had some responses, we've had some inquiries from other restaurant chains in town asking us to do some of their breads. Right now, with our capacity and just making sure we get our brick and mortar off and running, we're not approaching that yet, but we possibly will in the future.
Okay.
Might get another commercial kitchen someplace off-site that services wholesale requirements, that helps us with our demand here with, over baking, baking some products that we wouldn't have necessarily enough capacity to do out of this small kitchen. So I think I see us being able to grow, but being able to grow in a measured, controlled way.
For sure.
Because I don't want to grow fast.
No, definitely not.
I don't want to sacrifice quality. I want to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do and provide a good product on a daily basis.
So looking at just the community is a huge part in what you're doing here. I mean, that's kind of the mission behind it, is to serve the community. How can people in the community connect with you and support you in what you're doing?
Well, obviously, come on by. We're at 1214 Meridian Street. We're located in between Holtz Leather Company and Preservation Company and the old Lincoln Mill Commissary, right next to the Lincoln Mill Complex, which is under renovation right next door to us. Okay, come on by, introduce yourself, come in and have a cup of coffee and get a croissant. We'd love to sit and chat with you. We're also available on our website, www.l'etoilehsv.com, and same handle for our Twitter, our Facebook, and our Instagram accounts. You can go on there and see a little bit about us. You can see about our background and why we're doing what we're doing with the patisserie. You can see some of the menu items that we're going to have that week and some of the work that we've done for people in the past. But that's how they can connect with us. We've had a lot of opportunities with people walking through the door and saying, hey, this just happened in my life. A woman came by yesterday saying that she had just lost her husband, and she was very appreciative of the people that had shown her love and support during this time, and she wanted to give them some bread as a gift. She's getting some bread. I mean, we're going to make that happen. That's a connection with the community that I want to continue to try to foster as much as possible.
Well, I love learning more about the pastry and your journey throughout this incredible experience, and I continue to look forward to the success that L'Etoile will have in the community for years to come.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today, and look forward to interacting with you and your listeners.